His name is Quinn Talon, a completely normal 16-year-old, and just like many others, he really hates school. But it's not because he hates studying or anything like that. It's because of incidents like this. Some guy thought, wait, isn't that? Hey, try not to die by tripping over yourself, Quinn. The boy shouted down the hallway. Perhaps others would have tried to ignore these stupid comments, but Quinn couldn't. Quinn carried on walking down the school corridor. Harassment had become a daily occurrence for him, but it still bothered him just as much every day, and he couldn't help himself but retaliate. Quinn stopped and pushed his glasses back up as they had slipped down from his face. He needed a new pair, and just from looking at them, you could tell they were heavily worn. The sides were covered with tape and they didn't even fit straight on his face. Quinn then turned around and immediately gave him the middle finger. You're so stupid, I bet you don't even know how many fingers I'm holding up. The boy clenched his fist and started running towards Quinn. You level 1 piece of crap. When are you going to learn that you don't belong in this world? The boy then placed both of his hands together and a green ball of light started to form. When he was only a few meters away from Quinn, the boy threw his hands forward and the green light shot out from the palm of his hands. Quinn had nowhere to go and the beam of light was too fast for him to dodge. All he could do was grit his teeth and bear the pain. As the light hit Quinn, his body was lifted into the air and sent flying backward into the corridor wall. What's going on? One of the students nearby said. Are you guys fighting on the last day of school? A crowd had immediately formed outside as people were interested in what the commotion was about. One of the female students ran over to the damaged part of the wall to check on the student's safety. Are you okay? Said the girl. The dust started to settle and Quinn's slightly curly black hair was coming into view. When eventually the dust all cleared up and the female saw who it was, she immediately backed away and continued her business as if nothing happened. Oh, never mind, the girl awkwardly stated. When the female student had returned to her friends, Quinn could see that they were laughing at her. I can't believe you tried to help him, the girl's friend said. I didn't see who it was, the girl retorted with flushed cheeks. This type of harassment has become a daily occurrence. He just thought maybe today wouldn't be the same as all the others. But it's always the same and it seems like things will never change. After that, Quinn stood up and picked his glasses up off the floor. Once again one of the sides had fallen off. Damn it, not again. Stupid pieces of. Quinn angrily muttered under his breath. It was the last day of school for Quinn and he was hoping just once someone wouldn't try anything with him. Quinn was sick and tired of it and he wasn't the type to ignore it either. He had seen people who had chosen to keep their heads down and tolerate the harassment and their treatment was far worse than what he got. Quinn didn't bother to stay at school like the rest of the students. As he walked past, he saw people talking to each other. Some were laughing while some had tears thinking it was the last time they would ever see each other again, but Quinn wasn't a part of any of that and he didn't want to be. When he finally arrived home, Quinn immediately got to work. Quinn lived in a single-bedroom apartment that had just enough space to fit a single bed and desk. There was also a TV that was part of the wall, but Quinn would only use it as background noise and didn't actually watch anything. The apartment was provided to him by the government since he had no living relatives and was still only 16. On top of his bed was a single suitcase that had all his belongings neatly packed. Quinn then went to lie on his bed and turned on the TV for some background noise. He never really paid attention to what was on, but the sound of other voices made him feel less lonely. The TV was currently tuned into the news station. The peace treaty with the Dalki race has lasted for 5 years now, but officials are saying that tension is rising once again and now, we must prepare for another war. The mention of war has always been shown on the TV nonstop since that day. 30 years ago, the human race received a visit from the so-called Dalki. They looked like humans except for their dragon-like tails and scale-like skin. They immediately demanded that the human race hand over their resources and wanted to use them as slaves. Of course, the humans decided to fight back, but they quickly found out that their modern technology was useless against them. Bullets couldn't penetrate their skin, and as for tanks, well, Dalki had airships. Every man and woman were told to fight for their planet, and that included Quinn's parents. The war went on for years and Quinn grew up not knowing what his parents looked like. When the humans were on the brink of defeat, a select few came forward. These people had special abilities. They began sharing their knowledge of how they obtained such power in hopes of turning the tide in the war, and it worked. Even so, the Dalki were still strong, and a seemingly endless stalemate led to the peace treaty signing 5 years ago. Of course, Human greed got the better of humanity, and instead of sharing these powers with everyone, the higher-ranked governmental officials decided to keep them for themselves. Only those with money were able to learn the more powerful abilities, while everyone else was left with scraps. When Quinn's parents died in the war when he was at age 10, he was given nothing but a stupid book. A book that is impossible to open no matter what he did. When Quinn entered his room, he immediately pulled his drawer open, which contained a book inside. It was a large thick book that weighed about half a kilo. The front of the book was black in color, and in the center, it had a ring with lines going off in all different directions. "Let's try again today," Quinn said as he placed the book on the desk. He then immediately went to his bag to pull out a little test tube which had a clear liquid inside. "Test 112, hydrochloric acid. Let's see how it goes." Quinn then started to slowly pour the liquid out of the test tube and onto the book. So far, no reaction. Quinn then continued to pour the whole test tube onto the book, but still, there was no reaction. Quinn carefully examined the book to see if there was any damage done, but the book looked the same as always. Another failure. Why am I not surprised? Why won't you open? Why did Mom and Dad even have this junk? 112 times. This was the number of different ways that Quinn had tried to open the book. Not only would the book not open, but it seemed like it wasn't able to be damaged either. Quinn had tried burning the book, cutting the book, melting the book, but nothing had worked. Quinn was given nothing when his parents died. The government agreed to pay for his living accommodation while he was still in school, but that was it. When his parents died when he was at the age of 10, an agent appeared at his doorstep and handed him a book. He was told this was the only thing his parents possessed, which they passed down when they died. Maybe I should do something more useful, Quinn decided. Quinn picked up his glasses, which were still slightly broken, and decided he needed to fix them. Might as well try fixing these again, Quinn said. He noticed that one of the lenses was slightly out of place and tried to punch it back into its frame. "Looks like I'm going to need new lenses," he shouted as he pushed down hard. "Come on, just get in. Just a little push and ouch." The lens suddenly smashed into pieces, and one of the shards of glass created a deep gash in his thumb. "Why does the world hate me?" Quinn cries. Quinn immediately started to clean up the little pieces of glass and noticed a piece had landed on top of his book. As Quinn removed the piece of glass, a drop of blood from his thumb landed in the center of the book. The ring around the center of the book started to glow, and suddenly the book started to lift itself into the air. "What the hell is happening?" Quinn said surprisingly. The book started to shine brightly and shake uncontrollably. It finally opened up, and page after page was being turned. Quinn couldn't take his eyes off the shining book, as if he was in a deep trance. The words written in the book weren't in any language he had seen before, but for some reason, he felt like he could understand it. When the book finally turned its last page, it started to disappear as if it was slowly turning to dust. At the same time, Quinn's vision was starting to fade. His body felt weak and his eyes slowly shut. But just before he passed out, there was a single message that he heard. "Congratulations. You have been granted the VA." Unable to maintain consciousness long enough to hear the final words, Quinn passed out. Slowly Quinn's eyelids started to lift open and his vision started to return. His head felt heavy and his body was slightly sore. As he lifted himself off the ground, he touched his head to see if he had gotten any injuries. "Why does my head hurt so much?" After making sure his skull hadn't split open from falling over, Quinn then went to pick up his glasses off the floor. Although there was only one lens now in it, out of habit Quinn put the glasses on. Suddenly, he felt a little disorientated and his vision was slightly blurry. He took them back off and noticed that his vision only got blurry when he put the glasses on. Quinn then immediately rushed to his desk to grab a pencil. He drew the letter A on the wall and stepped back. Quinn continued to step back until his back had hit the room wall. What? But how? Quinn thought. Somehow Quinn's vision was now perfect. He had lived his whole life with terrible eyesight, but suddenly he could see clearly. Images then started to flash in his head of what had happened before he passed out, and he could think of only one thing. The book. When Quinn looked around the room, he started to panic. The book? Where the hell's the book? Quinn looked everywhere for the book, but nothing could be found. It couldn't have gone missing in such a small room, and the disappearance of it was making Quinn go mad. Maybe it's like my socks, they go missing all the time. Ah, don't be stupid, this is a book we're talking about, not a sock. Quinn then tried to think hard about what had happened just before he had passed out. He suddenly started to remember the book being lifted into the air. Then just before his eyes closed, he heard a few words. What was it? It sounded like some type of system message. Then as soon as Quinn had said those words, a status screen had appeared right in front of his eyes. User Quinn Talon. Race human. Level 1. 0 out of 100 EXP. HP 10 tenths. Strength 10. Agility 10. Stamina 10. Wow, it's like those really old games people used to play all the time. Quinn noticed that on the status screen, there were more tabs on the top, but without even doing anything and just reading the tabs in his head, the screen automatically switched. Skills. 0 skill points available. All skills locked. On the Skills tab, Quinn wasn't really able to see much. Everything seemed to be locked and slightly grayed out, so he quickly moved on to the next tab, which was called Shop. Shop. Unlocks at level 10. Can I do anything? The last tab was the Quest tab, and finally, it seemed like this tab wasn't locked behind something. Main Quest. Reach level 10. Daily Quest: drink 2 liters of water. Reward 5 EXP. After checking everything out that the system had to offer, Quinn had to just think about closing the system, and it did. When Quinn thought about opening it again, a screen would immediately pop up in front of him. Quinn could only think of one thing, that the book his parents had left him was an ability book. These books could often be bought at very high prices from the military or a company and could even be obtained on the black market. The only thing was, Quinn had never heard of an ability book that disappeared and granted the user a system like this. The ability books were designed to be learned. It wasn't something that you could pick up and instantly understand how to use. A smile started to slowly appear on Quinn's face. This was great news for him. He had always been a level 1 ability user because he could never afford to buy any ability books. Finally, he had something. The next phase was for him to test what ability he had. Fire, come on, Quinn said as he threw the palm of his hand forward. Okay, next water out. Quinn did the same again, but there was no result. After trying out many different things and all the abilities he had seen before, it turned out he was unable to perform any of them. What the hell useless thing is this? Is it really just a system ability? Quinn thought about it for a while. If it truly was like a game, then perhaps by completing the quests, he would eventually get stronger and unlock more skills. He was treating it like an ordinary ability book, and clearly what he had obtained wasn't ordinary. Usually, ability books were based on one ability. It was important for a person to select their first ability book because a regular human body would only be able to perform one ability attribute. If you got a transform ability as your first ability, you would only be able to get other abilities related to this attribute. This was the same for fire and so on. Quinn then went to open his mini fridge and started to grab the bottles of water that were inside. He immediately started downing the water bottles one by one. Damn, how much is 2 liters? My belly feels like it's going to burst. After finishing his 8th bottle of water, a new notification message had appeared. Daily quest complete, 5 EXP has been granted. 5 out of 100 EXP. Well, now I know at least the system works. Suddenly there was a loud knock that could be heard at the door. Quinn quickly went to the door and opened it. Standing in front of him was a large, muscular, bald-headed man wearing a black military uniform. There were several medals on it and his name was written just above his chest. Sergeant Griff. Boy, it is time for you to vacate your room immediately. The vehicle has been prepared and has been waiting outside for 5 minutes already. With everything that had happened, Quinn had forgotten about what was to happen that day. It's time for you to head to military school, Griff said. Oh crap, how could I have forgotten? Due to the war between humans and the Dalki, every person when they reached the age of 16 was required to go to military school for 2 years. Even though humans and Dalki were in a peaceful period, everyone knew that it wouldn't last forever. Every day there was news of one race antagonizing the other and war felt like it could start at any moment. Quinn quickly went to the toilet before heading off with Sergeant Griff. His bladder felt like it was going to burst any second now due to all the water he drank. Once Quinn stepped out of his room into the outside world, something strange happened. A new notification screen had appeared. Your body is being hit by direct sunlight. You are affected by the sunlight. All stats will be halved while in the sunlight. Suddenly, Quinn's body felt extremely sluggish. It felt like he had just gone for a 5K run and returned. His arms and legs felt heavier and there was nothing he could do about it. Quinn then went to check his status and saw that his stats did indeed go down by half, but it wasn't just his stats, but his HP as well. HP 5/5. Strength 5 out of 5. Stamina 5 out of 5. Agility 5 out of 5. What kind of drawback is this? Quinn thought. Then a new notification had appeared. You have received a new daily quest: avoid direct sunlight for 8 hours. Reward 5 EXP. Quinn's mood slightly changed as soon as he saw the new daily quest. Unlike the water one, this was something he was able to do naturally just by sleeping. If the system worked the same way it did in games, then that meant once Quinn had reached 100 EXP points he would be able to level up and also level up his stats. So, the more daily quests Quinn got, the better it was for him. What are you doing walking so slowly? The school will eat you alive if you carry on like that, Griff shouted. Finally, Quinn had reached a large bus that was parked just outside his house. When he entered the bus, he noticed that it was already full of students all the same age as him. He didn't recognize any of the students though, meaning they had all come from a different school. Quinn then went to sit at the front of the bus, which was the only seat that was still available. Stats have returned to normal. As soon as Quinn had entered the bus and avoided the direct sunlight, his stats had returned to normal and his body felt re-energized once again. Well, at least it looks like it's only direct sunlight. The students were all talking to each other in excitement, but that quickly stopped as soon as Sergeant Griff came on board. All right, it's time for us to head to the military academy. The bus then started to move and the students were finally on their way. The bus remained silent during the journey. Whenever a student would start to speak, Griff immediately would look in their direction and the student would shut up. Griff didn't even have to say anything. They all knew what he wanted just by looking at him. Then about 10 minutes into the journey, Quinn once again received another message. A substance in the air has been detected. You are feeling sleepy. Resistance +1. Quinn found this message quite strange, and then when he started to look around the bus, he noticed that nearly all of the students were either asleep or dozing off. Suddenly, even his own eyelids started to feel dizzy. Your resistance to the substance has increased. Resistance +1. Then the sound of loud footsteps could be heard coming towards him. As he looked up, he noticed Sergeant Griff hovering above him. Looks like a few of you were able to resist the sleeping gas. Then we will just have to bag you. A black bag was then thrown on top of Quinn's head and his vision now was completely covered. The gas started to slowly seep through and Quinn managed to doze off into a nice sleep. Then the next moment, Quinn could feel a splash of cold water being chucked on his face. His eyes opened instantly, and all he could see was the green grass. He and several other students started to lift their heads to look around them. There was currently a total of 200 students stood out on a plain open field, but when they looked around they were in a place that was completely foreign to them. This is where you will spend the next 2 years of your life. The students were amazed at what they were seeing. They were currently in a city like they had never seen before. Everyone was dressed up in military uniform and there were technology and engineering around them that was too advanced for their time. Giant robots moving crates and building machines, flying ships and levitating trains. It was a technology that hadn't been given to the outside world yet and was kept for the military only. After the first war with the Dalki race, the humans had managed to make leaps in technological advancement. This was because they had managed to salvage equipment from them after the war, but of course, the military decided to keep most of it for themselves. When Quinn finally stopped being amazed at his surroundings, he noticed that there was something placed around his wrist. It looked similar to a digital watch, but there was nothing displaying on the screen. That there on your wrist is your lifeline. It will identify you as a student at this military base. It will allow you to access certain areas, pay for food, and all sorts. It is your lifeline at this academy. That isn't the only thing that it will display though. When not in use, the wristwatch will display a single number and that number is your power level. As soon as Quinn heard those words, he gritted his teeth and clenched his fist. He thought his life might change was coming to military school, but it seemed like it was going to be the same even here. With that, we will immediately begin the level test for you all. Good luck, Griff said with a smile on his face.
When abilities were first introduced to the human race, people quickly learned that some were far more powerful than others. With this came the introduction of the power level system. There was a total of 8 different power levels, 1 being the weakest and 8 being the strongest. These levels could also be further divided into 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3 all the way to 1, 9, and it was the same for each level. There were 2 ways for people to obtain abilities. When the war started with the Dalki race, people started to share their powers with the outside world. They wrote down how they obtained this power and put the information down in things called ability books. These ability books went on for sale to the public and the military kept some of the stronger ones to themselves. Generally, ability books from level 1 to 5 were sold to the public. while giant corporations and the military kept the higher ones to themselves. The second way to obtain an ability was if you were an original. Originals were the first people who had originally discovered the powers for themselves and decided to pass them down within their families. Not all ability users chose to share their abilities to the outside world and decided to keep it within their bloodline. Originals usually had the strongest abilities that went beyond level 8. There was no way for the government to measure its power because it wasn't public knowledge. Because of these two reasons, Quinn had always been a level 1. He had no family members to support him, so he couldn't afford an ability book, and his family had no abilities themselves, so he wasn't an original. When Quinn had obtained the book, his first guess was that it was some time of an ability book. Now after all these years, it seemed like he had obtained an ability. But he had never heard of an ability book like this before, and he didn't have a clue what power level it had given him. Quinn lifted up his hand to look at the watch, which indicated his current power level was 1. When he looked around, he noticed that everyone else's watches currently indicated the same number. Griff was currently standing in front of all the students and called names in groups of 5. These students would then be transported somewhere to take the test. Quinn was hopeful at first, thinking that he might have been able to change his ability level for once, but his mind was quickly changed after receiving a notification. You are being hit by direct sunlight. All stats will be halved. Quinn didn't even know how good 10 strength, 10 agility, and 10 stamina was, but if his eyesight was anything to go by, then it would mean it was at least the top condition of a normal human being. But right now Quinn felt incredibly weak and sluggish. His body felt extremely hot right now and he was sweating buckets of water. Quinn thought it was a good thing he drank a load of water beforehand, otherwise he would have been extremely dehydrated. "Hey, are you okay?" a stranger standing next to Quinn said. The stranger's name was Vorden. He had slick blonde hair and hazel green eyes with a chiseled face and sharp jawline. He also stood 6 foot 2 inches tall while Quinn was 5'11". This was the type of person Quinn would usually avoid at his last school, as everyone would always pay them attention and Quinn hated attention. "If you want, I can call someone for help," Vorden said. "It's okay, I'm just a little bit nervous about the testing," Quinn said as he tried to ignore his tired body and stand up straight. Vorden looked Quinn up and down. Quinn was quite skinny for his age and didn't have a lot of muscle on him, and right now he looked incredibly weak. Vorden thought Quinn looked like the type of boy who would have gotten bullied at school, and it was the reason why Quinn was nervous. If he was to get a level 1 rating, most likely the same would happen here. "Well, don't be. I'm quite strong, you know. If anyone messes with you, you can come and ask me for help." Vorden smiled. Quinn didn't usually get on with the energetic positive type of person, but Quinn found it hard to dislike Vorden. When Quinn thought about his time back at school, he realized he actually didn't get on with anyone. "The name Vorden said as he placed his hand out. Quinn looked at Vorden's hand. It was actually the first time in his life someone had treated him this way, but Quinn thought that would quickly change. They always did once they found out his ability level, but for once he would like to forget about all that. "My name's Quinn," Quinn said as he shook Vorden's hand. "Use of ability has been detected. The ability has been rejected." Once the system messages appeared, Quinn looked at them strangely. At the same time, he shook Vorden's hand. The messages came up instantly. He then noticed that Vorden still hadn't let go of his hand. Then the system repeated the message once again. Use of ability had been detected. The ability had been rejected. Quinn then immediately let go of Vorden's hand. The system was clearly telling him that Vorden was trying to use his ability on him. Vorden himself even had a puzzled look on his face as he stood there still. "You," Vorden said, "what is your ability?" Quinn paused, thinking for a while whether he should answer or not. In the end, he wanted to see Vorden's true reaction. "I don't have an ability." Vorden no longer had a puzzled look on his face, as if the answer had satisfied the curiosity of his, but before Vorden could say anything, Griff had made an announcement. "Will the students, Quinn Talon, Vorden Blade, Peter Chuck, Layla Munro, and Aaron Hala please come to the front to take your test?"
Once the 5 students had heard their names being called up, each of them started to walk to the front, where Griff was standing. Including Quinn and Vorden, there was another boy named Peter. Peter looked more nervous than anyone there. He would constantly look around him and couldn't stop fidgeting. His body frame was quite small, but it suited him, for he wasn't that tall either. Then there were the 2 girls named Layla and Erin. Layla had short brown hair and a tall figure. On her back, she was carrying a bow, which surprised Quinn, for not many people carried a weapon these days apart from a specific group of people called Pure. They were a group of people who chose to not have any abilities and used weapons instead, but they were still very rare and Quinn had never met anyone like that in his life, only heard stories about them. Finally, there was Erin. Erin was the type of girl that turned all of the boys' heads. Her proportions were perfect, not too big, not too small. And she had beautiful long blonde hair. The only problem was her facial expressions. Even when walking through the crowds of people, not once did her expression change. It stayed stiff and neutral. As Quinn was walking past everyone, he noticed that he didn't recognize one student there, and it seemed like the others didn't either. Quinn could only assume that this was done on purpose. No one knew who to befriend or who to look out for, because currently, everyone's power level displayed 1. The group had stopped just behind another group who were being transported to the testing area. As soon as Vorden saw the others who were in the same group, Vorden greeted each one of them with a handshake. Vorden was being very polite, so most of them accepted his greetings apart from Erin. She merely stared at Vorden's hand when he offered it out to her, then she turned her head and looked away. "Come on, you don't have to be like that," Vorden said as he placed his hand on her shoulder. This was a big mistake. In an instant, Erin grabbed Vorden's wrist and twisted his hand. Then slowly his hand was starting to freeze and cover in ice. Everyone stopped to look at the commotion that was happening near the front. "Wow, she has ice abilities. Isn't that very rare? I would let her freeze me any day." Griff noticed the commotion and started to intervene. "Stop it, you two. If you have that much energy, then save it for the test." Erin immediately let go of Vorden's hand, and slowly, Vorden's hand started to defrost. Vorden then went back in line to stand next to Quinn. "Can you believe her?" Vorden complained. "I nearly lost my hand." "You can't just go around touching people without their permission," Quinn replied. "Yeah, I know. She's lucky I didn't wipe the floor with her. Just cause she's a pretty girl." Many people who were near the front had heard Vorden's word and had already decided to make him an enemy. If they could somehow humiliate Vorden, then maybe Erin would look the way they thought. Looking at the people around them, Quinn could tell what the others were thinking. Quinn then stepped one step away from Vorden, hoping that others wouldn't think the two were friends. Finally, Quinn and the others were called forward and were told to stand in a box. It wasn't really a box, but just white lines that had been drawn on the ground that was just big enough to fit the 5 of them in. There was then a hooded man who stood just outside of the box. "Send them away," Griff said. As soon as Griff gave the command, the hooded man placed both hands on the ground, and the box started to light up, shining a bright purple color. Transportation magic, huh? What a rare ability," Vorden said just as the whole group suddenly vanished into thin air. The next second, they were teleported to another outdoor area, which looked like an empty wasteland. There was no sign of life, no trees, no nothing. Standing in front of the group was a woman dressed in a black military uniform, and by her side was another hooded man. There was not another person in sight. The woman held a tablet in her hand, and it looked like she was currently busy inputting some information. Once she had finished, she looked up at the group and started to speak. "Hi everyone, my name is Jane, and I will be in charge of your test today. Once the test has been completed, I will update your information and your score will be reflected on your wristwatches." Jane then started to look at the tablet. "Now, who should we call first?" "Oh, it looks like we have a couple of previous level ones," Jane said as she checked the information that had been passed on from their previous schools. "Peter, would you please step forward?" The nervous small Peter then stepped forward, and he looked even worse than before. Quinn thought he looked bad, but he looked to be in perfect condition if you were to compare the two. At least Quinn was able to stand up, whereas Peter looked like he would fall over any second now. "Would you please tell me what your ability is, Peter?" Jane asked. I don't have any ability," Peter said quietly. Suddenly, Quinn and the others understood why Peter was so nervous. Having no ability wasn't rare. Because of the war, many children had become orphans like Quinn and Peter. This meant there was no chance for them to buy an ability book. But because Peter had no ability, he was afraid of the treatment he would get from the others. "Don't be afraid, Peter," Jane said. "Here, take this." The hooded man standing by Jane's side suddenly teleported a book into his hand. Jane then handed the book over to Peter. "Wow, seriously, you're giving this to me for free," Peter said in excitement. "Thank you. Please study the book in your own free time, and when you have learned to use it, you can come back to redo the test, but for now, I'm going to have to award you a level 1 power status. Even though Peter had received a level 1 power status, he didn't care, for he felt like his life could finally turn around due to the book that he had just received. Now I believe there was another level 1 user here. Jane said, "Quinn, is it? Would you please step forward?" Quinn did as he was told, and stepped forward. "Now Quinn, what ability do you have?" Quinn thought the whole thing was ridiculous. It was quite clear to him that Jane already had all the information on him from his previous school. They knew that he never had an ability before. The problem was Quinn was struggling with deciding what to do. Before coming to military school, Quinn had done a bit of research himself. He knew that the military gave all students who had no ability an ability book. Each ability book given was the same one. It was an Earth ability book. The reason they did this was so students who didn't have an ability before would suddenly feel indebted to the military. Not only that, but the military also had a hold on nearly all the Earth-type ability books. Meaning, if you ever wanted to increase your strength, you would have to be loyal to the military, and in return, they would give you more power. Before Quinn had discovered his own ability, he actually thought this was the best option for him. Even if he didn't want to join the military after 2 years, the Earth ability was handy to have. It was easy for employment because the Earth ability was useful in construction. This was where the problem came in. Quinn already having an ability meant he was unable to learn a new one. The ability book was practically useless. Not only that, but Quinn was pretty sure they would keep tabs on every student they had given the ability book to, meaning the teachers would accept him to use Earth powers the next time they saw him. Quinn took a deep breath and said, "I don't have an ability." Just like before, the hooded man standing by her side handed her a book, and then handed it to Quinn. Quinn took the book off Jane at first, but then suddenly, a notification screen appeared. Unable to learn this ability, would you like to convert the book into 10 EXP? Quinn had somewhat expected the system to display the first message, but the second one truly had surprised him. Quinn was really tempted to take the book and use it as a form of EXP, but he knew there would be questions asked later on. "I'm sorry, but I don't want it," Quinn said as he handed the book back to Jane. The students watching, and the instructor stood there, were both shocked. Jane hadn't experienced anything like this before. In her 5 years working as an instructor, it was the first time someone with no ability had rejected the book. "Please give me one moment." Jane then stood away from the group of students far enough so they wouldn't be able to hear anything. Yes, he says he doesn't want the ability book. What shall I do?" Jane said, speaking on her earpiece. "Let him take the test," the mysterious man on the phone said. As the man hung up, he couldn't help but think that Quinn was an interesting student. He started to look at Quinn's file, and what he had said seemed to be true. The student had no ability and didn't seem to have any relations with the group Pure. "Let's see how long you can survive in this cruel world, Quinn," the man said. Back at the testing field, Jane had finished the call with her superior and started to head back over to the group. "Sorry for waiting," Jane said. "Since you won't be taking the ability book, we will still require you to take the test, please." Quinn thought the whole thing was a joke. If Quinn truly had no ability, then they already knew what the test results were going to be. Was there really a need for him to take the test? It felt like the only reason they wanted Quinn to continue was to make himself feel humiliated and small. Eventually, then, he would choose to go to the military and beg for the ability book they were handing out. "Please follow me." Jane then took Quinn a little further out onto the field, where Quinn noticed that there were huge craters in the ground, burn marks, and all sorts of things. This was all done from the previous testing contestants. "Please proceed to destroy the targets in front of you as quick as you can," Jane said. "The test will begin immediately." As soon as Jane finished talking, 3 targets popped up randomly around the wasteland. They were metal round targets with a red dot in the center. The problem was, when Quinn tried to look for the targets, everything seemed like a blur in the distance. Quinn then realized that his perfect eyesight suddenly wasn't so perfect. "Is this because I'm out in the sunlight?" Quinn thought. Quinn had no choice but to slowly run up to each of the targets and hit them with his fist one by one. His time was incredibly slow, of course. There were then 2 further tests that Quinn needed to complete. The next test was a strength test where Quinn was asked to punch into a huge drum-like machine. Quinn gave it his best shot and hit the drum as hard as he could. The drum vibrated and made a small sound, eventually displaying a digital number in the center. 5. Strength, Jane said as she noted it down on her tablet. When the final test had arrived, they had brought out another machine. This machine was a big circular object with many holes on its front. Once the test started, the machine fired holographic spikes at the contestants. All Quinn needed to do was avoid being hit by the spikes. The machine went up in levels and eventually got faster and shot out more spikes. In the end, Quinn managed to get hit, and the test was stopped. Agility, 5. Jane said once again, as she noted it down on her tablet. Quinn had heard the words from Jane's mouth, and it started to make him think if there was some sort of link to the score she had given him. The last test was a test of strength, and Quinn had scored a 5, similar to his system, which had stated he had 5 strength. Then, once again, this test focused on agility and scored a 5, which was the same as his system. This meant if Quinn was to take the test at night, all of his scores would have most likely doubled. This also meant as long as he leveled up, he could always increase his score. It was as if his ability was the ability to evolve, but had some drawbacks with it as well. As expected, Jane said, "Unfortunately, your current power level is a level 1. Quinn clenched his fist and went back to stand with the others. He knew that the days ahead of him as a level 1 user would be tough, but that wouldn't be for much longer. The test continued with Layla taking the test next. She was the only one there who had a weapon on her back. The weapon she used was a bow, but it didn't look like a regular bow that people used to use a long time ago. This bow was carved using parts of a beast. It was black in color and looked almost as if the entire bow was made of gems. Even the string was made of a special material. The reason the bow looked so different was because it was what was known as a beast weapon. A bow made from the body parts of a beast. When the human race was attacked by the Dalki, our technology advanced fast by replicating their technology. With this, the humans learned the ability to travel to other planets using portals. These planets would often contain different levels of beasts. The stronger the beast was, the better weapon you could make out of it. It was the first time Quinn had ever witnessed a beast weapon before, as no one at his previous school had one. It was strange to see someone of such a young age, who has most likely never been to another planet, to have a beast weapon. Layla stood in the center of the field and waited for the test to start. Unlike when it was Quinn's turn, they waited until she was ready before starting. Quinn could already start to see a difference in treatment. When the test started, 5 targets all appeared in different areas of the wasteland. Layla immediately took out 5 arrows and placed them in her bow, shooting them all off at once in the same direction. The arrows shot out fast and strong, but then suddenly, the 5 arrows split off into their own direction, each of them heading to a different target. "What a good combo," Vorden said. She was the ability of telekinesis, but it's quite weak, so instead she uses her ability combined with the bow to control the arrows. In an instant, all 5 of the targets were hit at the same time, and she had completed the first test. Quinn for the first time saw how useful beast weapons were. Even if you had a weak ability, you could make it strong. Quinn wasn't completely sure what his ability was yet, but even if it just increased his stats as he leveled up, then he thought about how handy something like a beast sword or something similar would be. On the strength test, Layla didn't do so well. She used her powers to try to move her fist even faster when punching the drum, but in the end, her score was only an 8. The last test, Quinn also saw her do quite bad. When the test first started, Layla tried to use her ability on the spikes coming at her. Unknown to her because they were holograms and not the real thing, it had no effect. Meaning all Layla could do was rely on her actual body to avoid the spikes. In the end, Layla ended getting the same score as Quinn. "It looks like you have the ability level of a level 2 user," Jane said, and immediately the number 2 appeared on Layla's wrist. Quinn could tell Layla wasn't happy. She stropped back as she walked over to the group. Quinn thought the test wasn't really fair. Her ability level might be that of a level 2, but when used with a bow, Quinn felt like she could have easily beaten some level 3 or 4 users. Quinn was starting to take note that the academy really did only measure the power level of your ability and not your fighting ability. The next person to take the test was Erin. She walked forward confidently without even looking at anyone else. She stood in the center of the testing field waiting for the test to start. Then, 5 random targets appeared across the wasteland. Immediately, she formed an ice spear and chucked it at the target, hitting it dead on. She did this one after the other, at an incredible speed, nearly clearing them all just as fast as Layla did. The next test, Erin was even more impressive. She started to gather ice in both her palms, and then after a minute or so of gathering her power, a huge ice column was shot from her hands and hit the center of the drum dead on. The drum rang out louder than it had before, and the number kept going up until it had eventually reached 50. No wonder she's so confident, Vorden said. Quinn suddenly thought it was a good thing the two of them didn't fight, otherwise Vorden would have been a dead man. Finally, when the last test had arrived, the instructor told her she wasn't allowed to use her ability and should just dodge. Erin had no reaction and started the test immediately. She managed to do well, moving swiftly, avoiding each spike, but eventually the machine had gotten too fast and she ended up getting hit. Impressive, Jane said. Best results so far. Power level 5. Erin continued to walk back to her group as if she knew what she was going to get all along. Either that or she didn't really care about the whole thing. Finally, the last person to take the test in the group was Vorden. Time to show you what I got. Wish me luck. Quinn had no clue who Vorden was talking to, but Quinn quickly realized it was him after Vorden gave a wink in his direction as he walked off to the center of the field. Could that idiot actually be strong? Quinn thought. Most of the time, people who strong were either arrogant about their powers or kept it quiet, but Vorden was a strange person. He wasn't exactly arrogant, but more flashy. When it finally came to his turn and the test had started, everyone's mouth was left wide open at what they were seeing. On every single one of the tests, Vorden had done the exact same thing as Erin. He had used the same ability, the ability of ice, and had performed just as well. See, I told you I was strong. Vorden said. He showed the number 5 to his new best friend Quinn. Just what was Vorden's ability? Quinn thought.